Tolerance camp. Tolerance camp. Everybody needs to be tolerant, right? Todd Starnes, great job. Thank you. Crane Durham's Nothing But Truth, AFR Talk. Without further ado, a good friend, author, professor, commentator, and writer for Front Page Magazine, Dr. Bruce Thornton. Welcome back, Professor. How are you?
Good, Crane. Thank you.
There are a lot of things being said about the speech, and I actually want to call an audible and go to cut number 8, because I think if you would respond to Andrea Mitchell of NBC and MSNBC, because she thought the speech was historic, like Douglas Brinkley did of CNN. So here, Andrea Mitchell responding to the speech given by President Obama in relation to Trayvon Martin and George Zimmerman. Roll it.
He did two things. He, first of all, taught white people in America, those who were unaware, what it is like to be a black male. So the teaching moment was also to hold up a mirror to say to African Americans, I hear you, I understand, I am the moral leader of this country, and let's talk about race, and let's talk about these laws. He was very careful not to cross the lines where anyone could have said he was trying to influence the Justice Department's decisions on the Trayvon Martin case and George Zimmerman's verdict.
Now, that's the interpretation. Here's one part of President Obama, B14, one part. Let me know when it's ready. Roll it.
And that the poverty and dysfunction that we see in those communities can be traced to a very difficult history. And so the fact that sometimes that's unacknowledged adds to the frustration. And the fact that a lot of African American boys are painted with a broad brush, and the excuse is given, well, there are these statistics out there that show that African American boys are more violent. Using that as an excuse to then see sons treated differently causes pain.
Your article entitled "Our Race Hack President." Your thoughts, Professor?
Well, you know, this is the same old, tired narrative that we've been hearing from the 60s. And it's enduring, endemic white racism that accounts for all the problems afflicting the black community. It's the legacy of slavery that we hear talked about all the time as an excuse for the dysfunction of the black community. The problem with this, as Thomas Sowell, the Hoover Institution fellow, has pointed out with hard data, all of these factors, all of these signs of that dysfunction were better before the Civil Rights Movement for black people in terms of out-of-wedlock births, violence, everything you want to look at. So if slavery or Jim Crow caused all this, why has it gotten worse since the 50s when Jim Crow was in segregation and all this was still in place and racism was pretty acceptable among many in white society? So that whole interpretation, it's stale, it's old, it doesn't hold up to the historical evidence. It's nothing but an excuse. Because they have to have grievance. I know I've said this on the show before, that we have to keep our eye on this mechanism. It's grievance and guilt. If there is no grievance, then create grievance. Make it up. And that's what Andrew Mitchell, that's what the president, that's what they're doing. They're making it up. And as for Andrew Mitchell gushing over this supposed teaching moment, we have heard all of this for 40, 45 years now. Everybody's heard it. Everybody knows it. There's nothing new there. There's nothing that white people are learning that they haven't heard over and over and over again. So this was, in my interpretation is, President knows the Department of Justice investigation is going nowhere. If they try to pursue this, they're going to end up in a huge embarrassment. He has to pacify his base and the left who are unhappy with him for some other reasons, and he has to go on and he has to say, okay, I'm a brother. I'm going to give you the party line that Jesse Jackson and Al Sharpton give, and you guys can all then ignore the real problems that afflicted many of the black communities, which is lack of jobs and all these other things we've been talking about.
Professor, you referenced a fellow Hoover Institution scholar, as you are a research fellow at the Hoover Institution. And in your research, you actually produced a quote by Jesse Jackson, the Reverend Jesse Jackson.
Mm-hmm.
And he was speaking, and if you read the quote, if a person who was, well, if you were to make this comment after the comments that you have made, or I were to make the comment after what I've said about the race hustlers, wow. Pretty strong response we'd get. Why is it okay for Jesse Jackson? Well, first off, the quote about how he is, let me pull it up here. But in essence, if he heard footsteps that he thought were of a black group of kids behind him, and he learned that the people happened to be white, he'd be relieved. And
exactly.
And your thoughts on that? Because here's the thing. I'm so tired of this being brought up, because when it's brought up, they win. We're always on the defense in the sense of those of us, not white people, not black people, red-blooded Americans who sit there and go, wait a second, I want the truth. Go ahead, Professor. Tell me what this also illustrates about the race hustlers and the entire conversation.
Well, it's part of the big lie. He just slipped up in that moment. And what he said was, when he's walking down a dark street and hears footsteps behind him, and he turns around and sees that it's white people or it's not black people. Now, the fact of this is, and what we always have to emphasize when we're talking about black crime, other blacks are overwhelmingly the victims of black crimes. Mm-hmm. All right? That's the first thing. Nobody's saying that white people are justifiably against blacks because blacks are preying overwhelmingly on white people. The overwhelming number of victims of black people are the blacks. So this is the even greater insult to this whole hustle. The whole hustle is that there are these dysfunctional behavior, this violent behavior, all this kind of crime, and black people know it. They live with it. They're the victims of it. They have to deal with it all the time. But when you're talking in front of the whole nation, you're talking, in front of an audience that's not 100% black, then you have to go in to the deceptive narrative. You have to go into the narrative. And if somebody presses you on it, then you fall back, as the president did, on the old, it's the legacy of slavery. And I want everybody to think about how could that actually work, this legacy of slavery. How could 100 years, 150 years after slavery, these patterns of behavior can persist through so much change? And if you really think about it, it's a profound insult to black people.
Mm-hmm.
It's
bigotry.
You guys, yes, you are the passive victims of forces beyond your control, and you can never get beyond them no matter what. Of course, that's necessary because that legitimizes the position of the race hustlers of Al Sharpton, Jesse Jackson, and the other blacks who want to exploit that misery for their own benefit. But it's really it's an insult when you think about it, that every other group that's come here, manages to overcome, manages to, improve, as have blacks, by the way, many, most of them. But for this one subset, for some reason, they just can't cut it. They just can't make it. They are just passive victims of these large historical and cultural forces. I find that, and black thinkers like Thomas Sowell, Shelby Steele, also, they see this as a really deadly insult to black people.
And yet the very policies that would help arguably not only the black community, any community, but specifically the black community in the way of education is school choice. Yet you do not have the liberals supporting that, the left supporting that. But they send their kids to private schools. I mean, you see the hypocrisy. It's so blatant. Why has it taken so long? What I see now is I think this is turning. I think this is turning in America. I think the fact that, number one, stand your ground wasn't an issue. Now they're running with it because they tried race as an issue and they invented a term, white Hispanic. It's ridiculous. People are seeing how ridiculous it is. First off, do you think I'm right? Secondly, why has it taken this long to call out Jesse Jackson and Al Sharpton? It's not hard. They have a record. It's pretty easy.
Mm-hmm. Oh, Al Sharpton had blood in his hands. The Crown Heights riot.
Mm-hmm.
The Tawana Brawley hoax. He should have been done. He should have been finished. But he's on MSNBC and is treated by the President of the United States as some sort of oracle, you know. So your question, which I believe is true, is it going to turn around? I don't know. Part of me thinks, you know, okay, Obama, after his term's over, a lot of people are going to say, you know what? We had a black president. He was reelected. We're done. We're done with the ginned up grievance. We're done with the guilt, right?
Mm-hmm.
You people that are self-appointed spokesmen who are always talking all the time, you don't represent the majority of black people, right? And you're part of the problem by keeping this divisiveness going all the time. So maybe that will happen. The second part of your question is the same reason why socialism, even communism, global warming, all of these ideas, crackpot political ideas or invented catastrophes, etc., is because the media, the schools, popular culture, all of them are saturated with this ideology. And people now, we have two generations that have grown up in their schools, on TV, in the movies, on the network news, been hearing this over and over and over and over again. And it just becomes what they think is true. So it's going to take a long time and a lot of effort to get people to try and think beyond the, conventional wisdom that gets perpetuated, and just to use their common sense and just to start looking at things, a little more rationally.
And that's what it's about, rational, reasoned, fact-based discussion. And their goal is to silence us. I love how the president made the comment, they use these statistics. Well, it's amazing. You use these statistics. Well, there's a measure. In the adult world, we have to measure things and their results. What do the numbers tell us? And it seems to me that obviously the press has been shown to carry the water to be carrying the water for the president. But not only that, we're seeing it front and center because this is Duke lacrosse. This is front and center in the sense that they tried to convict a man, and they introduced race to do it. And our tax dollars went to fund some of those divisive protests, or at least organizing people for that, which is simply awful. And again, he didn't he didn't get in the way of that. He made very clear he was drawing the line. He didn't draw the line. His Justice Department got involved. I mean, Andrea Mitchell, I can't help her, but hopefully the vast majority of the people listening will see this as speaking nothing but truth and recognizing that the race hack president, as you described him, is just that in the way he's addressing these issues, and there's nothing heroic about that. It's, unfortunately, politics as usual. Bruce Thornton, you are a senior fellow, a research fellow at the Hoover Institute, and The Wages of Appeasement, Ancient Athens, Munich, and Obama's America. Wonderful book dealing with, what we are seeing right now in the area of foreign policy. But another great book that I've started, Decline and Fall, Europe's Slow Motion Suicide. Another must read. If you want to understand what's happening today in America, read that book. Bruce, Professor, thank you. Always a pleasure.
Thank you, Crane. Anytime.
Take care. All right. Crane Durham's Nothing But Truth. On the flip side, we have Buzz Jacobs, co-director of Benghazi 9/11. There are developments in the Benghazi story. General Ham, speaking at the Aspen Defense Conference this past weekend, breaking news. we have it. Crane Durham's Nothing But Truth, proudly on AFR Talk.